Hello. Thanks everybody for coming again to watch us talk about J111s. Our last one, part one, which was mostly about upwind and downwind sailing, was pretty well received. And everybody would like to have more information about sailing the boat, not just in a class setting. So we put together another show and talk about how you can optimize the boat for handicap sailing. So once again, I'm joined with by Seaton, Wiesen, Alan Terhune, and Jeremy Smart at North Sails in Gosport, England. And so Alan is going to run it again. So can you go ahead and get her going?
Thanks, Jack. Hope everyone's doing well. Just want to double check. Seaton's out there with us.
Yep, I'm here. How's everyone doing?
Jeremy, we're going to get you off of mute. We want to make sure you're working. Jeremy, you with us as well?
Yeah, back on. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, before we get going, we're just going to do our normal public service announcement here of for all you J111 enthusiasts out there, don't forget to join the class. But even as this talk is more about handicap sailing, don't forget your local clubs and sailing organizations and handicap groups and anything that you guys are normally members of. Make sure you pay your dues and stay active in those groups as we hopefully start ramping up for some sailing here shortly. So we're going to dive in here a little bit in the presentation. And part of it, we're going to go back to our last talk because we had a few questions and some topics that we didn't quite wrap up. So we're going to start off with just a couple quick things about hoisting and dousing the spinnaker and some things like that. So Jeremy, can you just get us into this real quick before we start with the handicap sails?
Yeah, we had a few questions on this. So sorry if my internet connection drops out. Seaton might have to take this on. But yeah, just on the hoist, we've got a video we're going to run shortly. But one of the questions we got was, yeah, you know, in those sort of breezy conditions, yeah, what are the tips for getting a good hoist? So yeah, one of the sort of things we always do on the J111, because it's quite a tippy boat, is
we may have lost Jeremy there for a little bit. Seeing if you're there, you can jump in.
Yeah, I'll jump in until Jeremy comes back. But you know what's listed on the slide here. Obviously, in one design racing, you can't pull the pole out until you're setting the spinnaker. So typically, that's going to be about the last thing out. Some of the key points here, you know, don't over ease the head sail. It's easy if you ease the head sail too far, you get a spinnaker wrap potentially. Yep. You know, if you're going to go plain, if it's that condition where you're planing, you know, the jib's up, the bow team gets the spinnaker up and weight back into their spots. But if you're not planing, jib comes down, it's really critical to get the jib down as quickly as possible because this kite just will not fill until the jib comes down. You don't want to drop the jib too soon where it drops on the spinnaker as it's going up, but you want to drop it before the spinnaker gets up. And having that coordination with the pit team is really important. You know, zippers or stop tabs, I think, are real important to use. I haven't used zippers on J111, but you know, something to use for windy conditions really makes a big difference in getting the spinnaker up when it's windy. And then in my role, where I'm in the cockpit, when we come around the weather mark, I take the jib from the jib trimmer. I ease the sheet to a set point so it doesn't ease too far. And as we come around the offset and the spinnaker is being hoisted, I go straight to leeward to pull the clew out around the shrouds and pull the leech down to assist the filling of the spinnaker. I think that's a real important point to get the spinnaker to fill sooner.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things, just like this is actually us at the Worlds, and like this picture actually angers me a little bit because I'm a pretty firm believer that if you can, you need to have as many people on the rail still as you can, right, to do this maneuver. If you look, none of us are on the rail, which is probably not ideal. But I think the two things that you're saying is critical. I think for the first hoist, if you can have the stop tabs on, especially I actually think it's more important for the head than even the tack, just so you can help pre-feed it up is pretty nice. And those if you don't have them, work pretty well, especially for folks here using or sailing handicap or short-handed, right? Usually they don't have an offset at these marks on some of these courses, right? So
right,
the stop tabs is pretty nice. And The other thing I think you're 100% right is getting the jib down is crucial because the longer it's up, the kite just doesn't fill. It's impossible. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Has anybody used the zippers yet on the, I don't think we really use them on this small of a kite, but
No,
definitely for offshore sailing that's going to follow later in the handicapped, you know, the A4 is probably really the only sail that you really need it. But
yeah.
the zip-
I would stay away from zippers for the one design sailing, but certainly something to consider for offshore.
yeah,
yeah, I would agree.
I think it's nice even to have the tack have a couple on it.
Yeah,
is a good idea. But like you say, you can't get the sprit out till you're headed to the offset mark. So it's
Actually,
not
yeah.
a big issue.
Yeah, you can't even get it out until the spinnaker's going up. So
Right.
that's even worse, is I think that they're super restrictive on that. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's even more critical to have those things on there. You're 1000% right, Jack. So I think we have a couple things before video here about going into the set and hoist. So I think, Seaton, I think you covered most of this, but you know, just one is kind of knowing your exit angle, right?
Yeah, it's really important to know what you're going to do before you hoist, so the bow team knows whether to leave the jib up and get back and hike or go forward and drop the jib. So it's important that everybody's on the same page to know what your mode is. And it's also really important so that the helmsman knows where to put the boat in terms of getting the spinnaker up. Does he want to sail really low, get the spinnaker up fast? Does he want to commit sort of high? Be careful of the boat setting in front of him so that they don't potentially round up and so on. So knowing the mode before you get to the offset is really important for everybody on the boat to know about. The other thing is to get, obviously in any boat, to get it going as quickly as possible is the key when the spinnaker's up. So having crew that go straight to their spots immediately is really important, as opposed to, you know, standing up, stretching, taking a look around, taking a breath or whatnot. No, that's not the time to do that. Get in your spot, get hiked out, or get in your right spot to sail low and get the boat going.
Yeah.
Hey guys, another quick question that I get a lot too is like when you're coming around the mark and you know you've had sort of a right shift coming into the mark and you're like, well, maybe we should jibe. What do you guys think about jibe sets versus picking your spot to jibe? What do you guys look at?
So for me, Jack, I think it depends on how big the shift is, right? So if I think it's one of those situations where you have to jibe just to lay the mark, obviously we do a jibe set. If it's, for me, if it's just a little skewed and I think I can set the kite and then do a proper jibe, I usually defer to do that. Because I think in my opinion, a jibe set is not necessarily the easiest thing to do all the time. So unless you know you can do it immediately, I don't think I would prefer to set and jibe, because I think the downfall of having a botched jibe set is too big. That's just my 2 cents, but I don't know if Seaton thinks.
Yeah, I agree. I usually don't want anyone to get off the rail to change the kite around. So it has to be a pretty drastic shift if we're going to actually unhook and rehook for a jibe set. And if it's going to be a, you know, pull this kite out of the hatch, pull it around the headstay as we're going around the off, you know, before we get to the offset type of jibe set, you know, the potential for error is high. So you need to be confident, and obviously that has to do a lot with how big the shift, how big the gain is. I think the two things I look at is what the traffic is. If there's a lot of traffic behind, I'm not too motivated to do a jibe set. I'll set, get a nice clean, you know, get the spinnaker up nice and clean, and then look for a little bit of a lane and then jibe. Whereas if the traffic is, you know, just piled up right in front and you can't really go high or low, then that sort of forces you right into a quick jibe set or a quick set jibe.
Right. And one of the things to think about too, Jack, if you're sailing with an offset, right, if it's a pretty big right shift, there's probably a decent chance you could set on the offset leg and then jibe.
Right.
So that might be another option. If it's a handicap race or a point-to-point race, I think it's going to kind of depend on what you think, you know, you can do cleanly, right? So
Yeah.
you may even have it set up to do a set on the other side. You might just jibe around the mark and set. I think it kind of depends on kind of your work and what the situation is. But I agree with Seaton on the traffic part. So before we go to the next part, Jeremy's back. Welcome back. So we'll get Jeremy on
Thank you.
here. But Chris Jones, I guess, is one of the class officers. And he wanted to remind us that the class rule says you cannot launch the pole until you're at the mark where you're going to hoist. If you pull the pole out on the reach leg, then you have to have the kite go all the way up to the top as well. So there we go.
Yeah.
So we'll go on to the video, Jeremy, while we're here. So we were talking about sets, and we got a good video of some heavy air sets here. So why don't you talk us through what we're seeing, and we'll keep going here.
Yeah, so this is the Worlds in San Francisco. Pretty heavy conditions for this set. So you can see all the crew here doing a nice job staying on the rail, on the reaching leg, and then staying on the rail for as long as they can before the top mark, just making sure they've got minimum guys off the rail to help the boat bear away. What they've done here, especially the Australian boat, they've committed to the mode that they want to sail. So they know they're going to sail the high mode. And as you see, when they bear away around here, they're the first one to get that bow up and go into that high mode. And on this sort of hoist, in this condition, it's good to not over ease that jib to help this sort of kite come up the back of the jib okay, without getting caught around the back of the battens and everything. And you can see there, the Australian boat's kite's hit the rig nice and early, and he's about to go a bit more bow up and start to go into that mode that he's committed to already. Yeah, so I think that's one of the key points to know what you're going to do. Are you going to go soaking mode, or are you going to go high mode? And also, particularly as we're talking about handicap sailing, in this sort of conditions, there's quite a few things you can have on your sails to make it easier. You can have a zipper on the tack to help with the deploy, and obviously on the drop at the bottom, having a drop patch on the kite also really helps with getting the sail into the boat.
So it seems to me the takeaway from watching this video on the hoist is making sure you get the boat down enough before you start hoisting. If you hoist too early, the boat will wipe out. And then once the kite is made, getting the bow back up, not only to fill it, but also to get to your target angle, which is really true in any breeze, right?
Yeah, definitely. With the J111, if you haven't got guys on the rail and you're trying to hoist with the bow too high, then you're going to spin out straight away. So get it down, set the kite, and then bow back up to the angle that you want to sail. Right.
And I think the beauty of this video is it doesn't matter if you're sailing handicap or one design, it's still the same procedure, right? So we'll go to the next here because we got to talk about a douse. We have one douse before we get into some of the sails. So we'll watch this. This is the same race, I believe, but at the leeward mark.
Yeah, I don't know whether Seaton wants to talk about this because Seaton was in one of these boats. So maybe the boat coming around first is what Seaton's on, but yeah.
Yeah, so the key takeaway from this video and a good mark rounding, and you'll notice, is how early the spinnakers are being dropped and how well prepared the boats are to go upwind as they come around the buoy. It really pays to get the sail put away and get crew on the rail as you're coming around the buoy. I'm on Skeleton Key, which is this next boat coming around, and we did a relatively early drop here. And what you lose in the early drop is not even close to what you lose if you're still have crew to leeward or putting the spinnaker away, not set up. And so that's one of the key points I want to make when you're sailing in this breeze in heavier conditions, is to make sure you drop early enough, get the sail put away quickly. And, as Jeremy just said, having a takedown patch really assists in helping getting the spinnaker down into the boat and more manageable for the bow team.
Yeah, Seaton, that was really quite a wide, both boats did a real wide turn there, wide and tight. So that's a function of the wind speed, you think, how far you should be from the mark?
Yeah, I mean, there's also a function of how much space we had around, right? As it gets windier, the fleet started to spread out a little bit. And so it allows you to pick your course, and it allows you to do a nice wide turn and, a good drop. So, that's a bit of a luxury we don't always have. But the key point there is, if you don't commit to bearing off hard to help get the spinnaker down quickly, then it's not going to come down very quickly and you're not going to have a very good rounding. So know what you have to do to get the job done fast is sort of the key takeaway. And I think both boats here have done that very nicely, and you can just see how they are ready to go upwind as they go around the leeward mark.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense, and yeah, couldn't agree more. So the last, well, for the folks that are watching along, the chat room's open. If you have questions, you can feel free to send them on. But the last question we got on the previous webinar, before we get to some of the new stuff, was about rig tuning. So, Jeremy, we don't need to go through the tuning. There's just a couple quick highlights of what you see here, and
yeah, we're not going to go into the rig tuning too much. It's a very big subject, but obviously, I think everyone who's sailed the 111 knows there's some big gains to be made by keeping on top of your rig tuning. So here on this slide here, we've got a screenshot of the basic matrix that they use on the European boats. So these boats have all been set up with a bottle screw on the forestay for a while now. So we've got some adjustment on the headstay, and then you've got the screen there where it turns up and down. But one thing to look out for, I know because some of the European boats have been bought by North Americans and taken over there, is just to keep an eye on what sort of bottle screws you've got. Because these do have a different effect on how many turns you need to put on the rigging. So the ones on the left, all the boats in Europe pretty much have those, and I think quite a few of the boats in America do as well. But the ones on the right, none of the boats in Europe have those, but quite a few, maybe, I don't know, 50% or something of the boats in America do. So you just need to work out what you got, because I think one turn on the left is probably equivalent to 2 turns on the right-hand picture there. So that's just one thing to look out for when you're looking at the guide. But all those, the full tuning guides are all on the website, the North American one and the European one.
So I think I'm going to go back to this before I don't want to spend too much time on this, but on this rig chart, I think the one good thing about this, and maybe Jack, you can jump in on this, is that no matter what kind of sailing you do, having something just basic like this, even if it shows which jib you use or anything, and you can modify these, like you don't have to use the guide exactly. I know the ones on the boat I have on, I probably, changed a couple measurements and you scribble over it with pen and have your own little chart. It's pretty nice to have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you got to build your own matrix, because every boat's a little bit different. And one of the other things we talked about earlier today when we were talking about this and talking about the shroud and the turnbuckles, not every boat's going to have exactly the same length shrouds, maybe.
Right.
So,
exactly.
There are differences from boat to boat, no matter what. I mean, they're not built with laser beams and micrometers as much as you wish they were.
Yeah.
So, so everybody's going to be a little different. And of course, everybody's got different conditions, right? Like in San Diego, the light air condition, you still got a big lump, not lump, but a swell. So you might tune differently than somebody in Long Island Sound, where the water's really flat when it's light. So,
right.
Yeah, so you got to sort of do it your own as you go. This is just a guide, but even if you're not racing class, it's a good place to start, because the whole idea for us is why we generate this is that, we're trying to balance the headstay versus the mast bend and make sure that the sails can go through the complete range of adjustments.
Yeah.
And the sails working together. So, yeah, for sure. And, start here and then and then modify it as you go. And I probably, the other thing I would sort of note, if we go back, is if you go back to the chart real quick, is it says forestay pin to pin 15.14.
Yeah.
So most of the J boats, like J109s and J105s and J88s, they all have to use a furler. So they don't have the luxury of moving the forestay length. Mm-hmm. I would probably suggest to most people, even if they're intense class racers, they'll get into it, but stick to the original, what we think is a good rake and forestay measurement, and then start adjusting from there. Because once you start to adjust that length, all the other pressures change.
For sure.
So,
and I think that is the difference. Not to spend tons of time on it, but when the U.S. boat started, we couldn't adjust the forestay. So we had to do it all to shrouds, and the European boats had a turnbuckle, so it was slightly a little bit different. But most of the 111s now probably don't have furlers unless they're sailing the old way or with handicap. But
Well, I think the majority of boats in North America are still going to be
and
sailing.
with the furler, it could be true actually. All right, so let's talk about this handicap sailing with the boat, right? Because it's one of the things that we all agree the J111 does really well. So, Jack, I'm actually going to come back to you to kick this off. So just run
Yeah, so, you know,
overview here. Yeah.
one of the things is, as I'm the offshore one design coordinator for North Sails, I try to herd all of the J boat classes and some of the other offshore one design boats. And really in North America for sure, and I know this is true in Europe and Australia as well, more of the boats sail handicap than they race class. And more of the people crew on boats that sail handicap than actually race one design. So the boat's multi-purpose for a reason. J Boats is brilliant in coming up with all of these boats that rate well under a handicap rule as well as being good one design racers. Now, that being said, one design configuration isn't always going to be the best fit for a given handicap rule or for your local handicap rule. So it pays to sort of do a little homework and take a look, like where we live in Long Island Sound. The base rating for PHRF is basically using class setup. So it doesn't really make any sense to do any changes. Some people are sticking to the furler and not using a new headstay. And they actually, if their sails can furl, they get a small credit for using the furling. So it's going to be different in every area. And then the big handicap rules, ORC, IRC, ORR, all of those rules, you know, there are different sails that are allowed. There are that can be tailored for different wind conditions. And then also you could change the sizes around slightly to get a better rating. So it makes a lot of sense to do some homework, see what works in either your local area or whatever rule you're going to race under. Like we have some big regattas coming up, like the ORC, IRC Worlds, which is hopefully going to happen in the fall in Newport. And, you know, it might make sense to think about adding some sails that'll work in that regatta and how you can optimize. And also the MAC race under ORR. I know they race as one design, but are they allowed more than just a code 0? Alan, you know that?
I think it's just the code 0 plus class sails, but I think you're right. And looking at the handicap thing here, Jack, and going forward, and this kind of brings us to our next slide, so it's a good transition. So I think having, you know, when you're doing point-to-point or handicap sailing, is having a good sail chart. So, I mean, Steve, I think you talked about this a little bit, is what this is and how this kind of relates, and we'll get further into the discussion of all these sails, but let's talk about what this is right here.
Okay, so this chart is a graphic illustration of where we think all of the sails on this particular boat. This is a J111, used to be called Partnership, now it's called Fireball. Very successful boat in New England. And so anyway, over the years, this boat's, because there wasn't a lot of class racing, they did mostly handicap racing, and they did a lot of like Block Island race, the Vineyard race. They talked about doing Bermuda race at one point. So, you know, where the class sails are not optimized the most are in the sort of reaching angles. So there's lots of opportunities with different kinds of sails. So like I put on the right, jib top is a possible sail. We'll talk about that at the end. Code sails, code 0, code 65, code 55, all of those things work better or worse in different configurations under different rules. Reaching spinnakers like the 3A is a good sail to have if you're going to be doing lots of sort of medium air type reaching or VMG sailing in very light breeze. A Spinnaker Staysail is free under almost every rule, and that's definitely worth exploring. And then Storm trysail, storm jib. Luckily, the heavy weather jib for class racing already qualifies as a heavy weather jib under the racing rule of sailing and the safety rules. So that's a good sail to have on board too.
Gotcha. And I think we can ask the other two guys. I mean, do you guys have charts like this for your boat? Whether you're, I mean, may even use it for one design sailing sometimes, but do you guys have this type of stuff?
For a variety of boats that I sail on, I do. Not so much for the 111 because when we race handicap, we're sort of simplifying our inventory. But I think it's important for everyone that sails on the 111 to kind of know what sails they have, where they fit in, and where their gaps are. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we kind of go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the same for me. We're mainly sailing in Europe at the moment. The 111s are mainly sailing one design, but sometimes the regattas we do are handicap. But certainly, if I'm on any sort of handicap boat racing IRC, we'd have a look at the chart like this, and obviously, if you're doing any sort of offshore double-handed, these reaching sails are really key to getting the boat going.
Yeah. Well, and kind of how this all plays in on the next slide here, we have a sample of a notice of race, right? And for doing all these handicap races, this is probably one of the more crucial parts to look at, right? So I don't remember who added this part in. Maybe Jack, you did.
Yeah, I did. I took this out of the, because I actually make a matrix of all of the distance races that we have in the Northeast of the United States. And I try to quantify all the rules and what sails, because basically it's no fun for us in some ways, because we have ORC, IRC, ORR, and maybe PERF. So, and sometimes multiple perfs. So PHRF for every region is slightly different and allows different sails and have different certificates. So it's really important to sort of keep straight what you're allowed to have and what you're not. And in this case, this is the Newport Bermuda race. In the notice of race, it gives this description, and this is actually a modified version of the ORR regulations, what's allowed for a given size boat. And so it's pretty well laid out in this for this race. But like I said, for a MAC race, it's worth taking a look at what's in there, or if you're going to do Transpac, or who knows. Some other distance race, it makes sense to take a look at what's allowed. Most PHRF, it's almost unlimited, but a lot of times they ask you to declare if you have a code style sail. So,
just to, this is for very specific example of just Newport Bermuda, right? But I think the short lesson here is, before you're going to do any of these races, check the notice race, see what sails are allowed. If you have a big race coming up, usually these come out early enough, you can pick and choose your sails. So we're going to push forward here a little bit. So we've kind of figured out what sails, we've seen the sail chart. So the next part here is how to actually set these sails on the boat. So Seed and Jeremy jump in here a little bit. So here's the boat layout. You guys, we have a picture, I think, of the skeleton key, and the next one you can show these outboard lead, but where do you put them? Why do you put them there? How is all this determined? So I forget which one of you guys started this off in our practice session, but either one.
Yeah, I mean, the outboard lead for the jib is really important, even for class racing. And as Jeremy will probably tell us a little bit about the video that we have showing the boat sailing downwind with the outboard lead. But it's an important lead to have for class racing, so every boat should have it. But obviously, for handicap racing, it's a must. So we have a photo of where the jib outboard lead should be. Also on this diagram, we have the location of where the tweaker should be for a code 0. And then we've also noted where the Spinnaker Staysail tack should be. So these are three locations of something that needs to be added to a stock boat to get more out of the boat for handicap racing.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's critical for whether you're one design or doing any of this handicap stuff to have, especially the jib outboard lead, I think, for sure. Yeah. So let's actually get a photo of that. So this is your boat here, right?
Yeah, this is skeleton key here. This is the outboard lead. You can see the location distance, in front of the shrouds or behind the stanchion. you know, here we just have a ferrule. You don't do a lot of adjustment in and out, so it doesn't need to be a block, you know, a ratchet or anything. It can be, but in our use, we don't really play it a lot. It goes, you know, to a cabin top winch typically, and then we set it.
Right, so looking at these photos, just clarify for me. So the photo on the left, basically the bow is to the left in both of these photos, right?
That's correct.
So the pad eye here is maybe, I don't know, half a meter in front of the shrouds, something like that, maybe less?
Yeah, maybe a little bit less. Yeah. But
and then the other one is just a little bit behind the first stanchion that's behind the shrouds.
in front of the shrouds.
Yeah, it's sort of at the front of the window.
Yeah.
Ah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the stanchion in front of the shrouds, right? That forward stanchion.
Yeah,
Got
like
it.
clearly these guys are mostly class racing. If you thought you were going to double hand or do more offshore racing, you might just put a pad eye there. And then that way you can either put a, you know, one of those low friction rings on a little strop, or you could put a block there because you might be doing a lot of different sails, you know, if you're going to do some reaching.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's go, you know, looking at this outboard jib lead. So Jeremy, I think you got us this video here of, which we showed in the last one, but just to show the planing downwind, but the jib on the outboard lead. So maybe just explaining a little bit what's going on here. And
Yeah, sure. So I think obviously this is going downwind, showing the jib trimmed on those same position that Seedon was just talking about on those outboard lead points. When they're going downwind trimming the jib, you trim it on a much sort of finer sheet, maybe a 6 or 8 mil sheet, led to the lead through to the aft block so the tactician can trim it. But obviously, you're 2-sail reaching, you're going to need a proper jib sheet on there and running it up onto the cabin top winch or onto the primary winch. I would say, yeah, if you're 2-sail reaching, probably as soon as you're outside, maybe 40, 45 apparent, you're going to be wanting to get that outboard lead on and start moving the clew of the sail outboard. It'll really help with the reaching performance and help with the, setting the sail, foot and leech correctly.
yeah, and it seems like it actually helps you even when you jibe to have this on there, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think for downwind, setting with it downwind, it's an absolute must to have it on the outboard leads, and to help having it up there in the jibes is a definite gain, going straight onto the outboard leads. So
looking at this, and one of you guys can jump in. I mean, it looks like for anyone who's curious what's happening, the reason why you're on the outboard lead, as you can see, and I'll see if my pointer can do it, is you're basically keeping the slot open between the main and the jib and the kite to keep them evenly so they're all working. If the clue of the jib was actually in here where my arrow is, you'd have a problem with the main getting stalled by the jib, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it would be stalling in the lower section, and the upper section would be completely twisted open. So you're just looking to match the profiles of the sails as much as you can. I mean, the thing is, when you go reaching with a head sail, you actually want your lead to be ideally like a foot off the side of the boat or something like that. You can't get it out far enough, which is why some boats have reaching struts, or on open 60s they have the outriggers because they want to get the clew of the sail as outboard as possible. So that's what you're trying to do. Just as soon as you go reaching, you're trying to get that clew of the sail away from the boat.
Seems like it would be better too if you ever had the bad luck of wiping out, and then you basically sort of drop in the chute to get things under control. On the outboard lead, it's going to be flying a little bit better than if it's flopping around in the inboard.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so we're going to move on here a little bit. We're going to start talking code sails. So the first sail we have up here, we'll start getting into it. What is a code zero? What are we even talking about? See, and kick us off.
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Code zero is essentially qualifies as a spinnaker. It's a very flat, sort of upwind, close-winded sail, loose luff, but because it has a 75% mid girth, it qualifies as a spinnaker. And you can see in the photo here how it's being used and how close-winded it is, but it's a real weapon in 0 to 10 knots. maybe even a little bit less than that. And what it also works nicely as on the J111 is a good reaching sail as the breeze picks up.
Got it. So in looking at code sails, going forward, there are 3 different kinds. So, Jack, you put this slide together. Talk us through a little bit about what the differences are in what we call code 75, a code 65, a code 55, and then, Jeremy, maybe you can jump in and talk about how it would get looked at towards rating rules. If you guys could both talk about that a little bit, that would be.
Yeah. So basically, the one on the far left, the 75% mid-girth sail, that's the official under almost every rule. It's considered a spinnaker, and you might under ORR or ORC, you might actually get some rating, a slight rating difference in certain wind angles to have the sail. If the race gets scored, as an offshore race in a certain wind speed, you'll get a little bit of adjustment for it. But in general, in your most racing, even ORR and ORC, you wouldn't see much effect at all with a standard 75% mid-girth sail. And then, like with anything, we can customize as much as you want. So like the most extreme one is the one on the far right, which is basically a masthead jib out on the sprit. It's got actually a little bit of hollow in the leech. The diagram doesn't show it very well, but the mid-girth is, the leech is going to be super straight, maybe even a touch of hollow if you do 55% mid-girth. And the middle sail is sort of the compromise between the two. And it just depends on the rule and what other sails you have that you sort of want to pick what works best. Because essentially, the one on the far right, if you had a cruising boat and you didn't really care about rules and you just wanted a sail to knock around in light air and, make the boat go, like a lot of the more modern, cruising boats that just have tiny jibs with big mains and swept back spreaders. The sail like this is great. You hoist it out in front of your regular jib and you blast around in light air. And so, and like I said, the one in the middle, it's going to have a little bit less hollow, more straight even yet, maybe a little bit of positive. And that's the sail that would originally have been called a tweener under the ORR rule, which is an absolute weapon because all that extra leech that's in the 75% sail, anything you can do to get rid of that sort of keeps the sail from flapping and allows you to sheet it in a little tighter.
Right. So, Jeremy, tell us a little bit about the difference, with these sails and how they impact the rules, right? I think the big difference is the one on the left is spinnaker.
Yeah. So certainly under the rule, we race mainly in the UK, Holland, Belgium, and France under IRC. The only one of these that we could really use in that rule without really hammering the rating would be the code 75. The 65 and the 55 would be rated as a head sail and they would hammer your rating. So under IRC, which you race mainly here, you can only really go for the code 75. And obviously with that code 75, that's the one that presents lots of design challenges in terms of making a flat sail where the leech still stands up nicely without flapping. And as we're going to later on in the talk about the Helix sail really helping with that, because that puts the luff forward so there's less on the leech, and that really helps with the with controlling these 75% mid-girth sails. I think you just got to know what rule you're racing under and what you're trying to optimize the boat for. Like under ORC, a really good combination might well be to have an A3, like an 85% girth A3, and then go for the J0 code 55 as your upwind sail. That might be a really good combination for ORC. Because unfortunately this year, the two rules, ORC and IRC, have diverged a little bit on how they treat code zeros. So now ORC penalizes the code 75 a little bit more than it used to. So it's maybe a bit more favorable now under ORC to have an A3 and a code 75 and not have a code 55 and not have a code 75 under ORC. But under IRC, you just want the code 75. So it's a bit of a minefield, knowing which sail to have. But you just need to get the right advice and choose the right sail.
Got it. So I'm looking at these three sails, and we're gonna go to the next slide and see, maybe you can jump in here and explain this, is kind of how these three sails play against each other in these wind angles and what they really are strong at, and how you can pick and choose this, because I think it's a confusion on what they are, right?
Right. So the A0 code 0, code 75 is kind of your most all-around, all-purpose sail. The code 65 and the code 55 were developed from the code 0. And essentially, as Jack was saying, we can customize these sails to the condition that you want them to perform the most in. But you can see that the code 0 will give you a lower angle because it's a little bigger and it's a little rounder. The code 65 is sort of in between, a little closer winded because it's a little flatter sail and a little smaller in the sail area, smaller mid-girth. And the code 55 is, as Jeremy says, it's really like a masthead Genoa. It's a very flat sail, small mid-girth, really oriented towards going as close to the wind as possible. More of a light air type of sail. Again, you have to, as Jeremy and Jack both are saying, you got to understand what rule you're trying to optimize towards, but then you also have to figure out what's going to be most optimum for your sail inventory. And one of the key points with the J111 is that it's a boat that doesn't reach all that well. So anything you can do to enhance the reaching performance, versus other boats that are stiffer, wider, more powered up, is important. So knowing which code sail is going to help you is really key. But essentially, this sail chart will show you the angles that each one is intended for and the wind conditions that you can use them in.
So, and looking at this, so these two lines, the one on the side here shows your wind angle, and then along the bottom is your wind speed, right? So we're showing basically a 95-degree wind angle, and a 10 wind speed basically puts you in here.
Yeah, exactly. So 10 knots, you can see how anything above that blue line, how, and to the left of the 10 knot line, the vertical line, how much closer to the wind you can get as it's light, as the wind is light. And as the wind increases and the boat gets overpowered and wants to tip over, you're forced to sail lower. But really, we're optimizing for that above 90 true wind angle and under 10 knot true wind speed. But as you can see in this chart, the sails are still pretty useful sailing below a beam reach, even to a 125 true wind angle. And certainly, you get over 10, 15 knots, they're still pretty effective sails for reaching.
And Jack, we talked about this before. If you had a code 75 and you didn't have, say, an A3 or an A5 in the inventory, you might be able to drop this code 0 arc down,
Right, exactly. Like this is just
lower.
sort of, yeah, exactly. Like basically any one of these sails you could sort of trail down, and you'd have to tweak the leech and so on to sort of help it fly a little better as you go deeper.
But it could be your windy reach sail at
sure, absolutely.
150 degree angle at 18 knots of breeze. You might use your code 0 with a
right. If you don't have an A3
type
sail, then yeah, and because an A2 might not be able to get up there without really tipping the boat over.
Right.
Yeah, I think that one of the main points is that the A0, or whichever one you pick, can potentially be a more valuable sail than just a reaching spinnaker. You get a lot more use out of it for the J111.
Right.
Got it. So let's go to the photos of I think we have. All right. So this is the same boat we saw before, but let's Jack, I think you may have sold this sail to the Fireball. So just tell us a little bit about what we
so that you can see this sails. This is the new Helix design, and we'll talk about it a little bit better, like if more in depth later. But essentially, you can see this sail. If the far left picture, the luff of the sail because of the way we've designed them now, where the luff has a lot more reinforcement in the actual structure of the sail, it allows us to make the sail fly more positive in the front of the sail, so that it isn't just like a really super boned on rope with the sail hanging off of it, which is what you would have had on the old style Code Zero. And you know, the other two pictures, you can just kind of see how clean the sail is. This particular sail is made out of what we call Norlam Code material, which is basically a scrim mylar material with Kevlar in it to reinforce it, Kevlar yarns or aramid yarns. And then this particular one has a taffeta on one side, but it also can be clear. But it just makes a super smooth sail. And you can see in this race, the guys are, you know, they got the boat balanced perfectly. They got it heeling just right. And the thing is trucking along and probably going 6.5 knots and 6 knots of breeze. So
one of the questions we got two. Joel asked us a question about the sprit, which we're going to get to in a little bit, but I have a question for you guys, and you can talk about it. So talk about the furling of these sails. And people question all the time, you know, furling, you know, you top down, bottom up, and we're going to get into the Helix part of it here in a second, but just conceptually, you know, Code Zero, 75% versus 55% mid-girth. How are you deciding which way to furl it, and what's your opinion on that? We'll let all three of you can jump in. I saw Seaton nodding, so you can.
Yeah, Jeremy seems to be the furling expert. He's always got a lot of info about furling, which is great. I mean, it will be virtually impossible to use one of these sails without a furler. I mean, I shouldn't say impossible, but it's a handful for your crew to get these sails up and down without a furler. So they're really designed to be used on a furler. And that just allows you to use it when you're double-handing, short-handed sailing. So it's really key to have a furler. The more girth there is on the sail, the more important that it's a top-down furling sail. If it's a pretty flat head sail type of Code Zero, like the Code 55, you can get away with bottom-up furling. But for the 75% mid-girth sail, top-down furling is the way to go in my mind. But I'll let Jeremy touch on that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think when you've got a Code 55, or if you've got a jib top on a Helix jib top, then you can get away no problem bottom-up furling. But anything like a Code 75, where you got some roach on there, you get a much more secure furl furling top down. If you get bottom up, if you furl bottom up on a sail like that with a Helix sail, you're going to get a relatively loose furl, so you're not going to be able to have it up before the top mark. It'll start blowing undone. Whereas if you have a top down system, it'll be nice tight furl. You'll be able to hoist it before the top mark, or you'll be able to have it hoisted on the reach, just waiting for the right time to deploy it. And that's one thing over the last sort of year, North Sails have done a really good job on, in conjunction with Future Fibers, to develop these luff cords, which have enabled us to really nicely top-down furl these Helix Zeros with a really nice tight furl. So you haven't got to do any bearing away. You can do an inline furl, get a nice tight roll, and it's really secure.
So I'm glad you brought this up, and I've already gotten the question, and it's the part we really need to talk about is, what is a Helix sail, right? I mean, we're used to, I think everyone's starting to understand this, but, traditional sail has a big, huge cable in the luff, and they just don't anymore. So, I mean, Jack, why don't you kick us off here? I mean, what is this conceptually, and how does it work?
Yeah, so these pictures there's some illustrations here. Jibe Braun, who's one of our top brainiacs in the company, who's, extensive America's Cup and offshore sailing guru. They basically went out and built two sails. They built a traditional kind of Code Zero. This happens to be a Taylor 43 that's up in Marblehead. And they said, well, let's build both kinds and compare them. And they actually went out and did a really good job of taking some good photos of what the difference is. And you can sort of see it on the right. The one with the sort of more white colored sail is the traditional Code Zero that we would have made, 2 years ago. It has a big cable in the luff, or a bigger torsion rope in the luff that's going to act as a stay, but essentially the sail hangs off of it. So it's, you can see the sail sort of falls off of it, and you know, you're really dependent on really getting a lot of tension on it to get the sail to sail higher. Now the one on the right is a Helix one, where a lot of the load is being taken by the sail. And in this particular sail, the gray sail, happens to be a 3DI sail, so it sort of accentuates it even more. But the luff structure is taking a lot of the load, so the rope doesn't have to, and you can actually see the positive curve of the luff. And that actually swings out and sort of flies out in front of the sail. And it's you know, the sail that opens up the entry angle, and the whole thing can just, you know, the whole sail sails tighter against the rig, and then the luff, because it's more open, allows the boat to point higher. And the other cool thing about it is that extra girth that's now in the luff isn't in the leech anymore. So they don't have a good picture of it here, but the sail on the left, the white sail, would have a big floppy leech. And then on the left-hand picture, you can sort of, the diagram that comes off the computer, you can see the sort of difference in the luff setup, how it likes to fly. And the one on the far left where it says traditional cable supported, like the straighter you can make that, the higher it'll fly. But the one on the right, you actually don't even have to put that much tension on the luff, because the thing wants to extend out and fly positive. And it's just so much more stable. You know, the telltales work better. These sails are really a revolution.
And this shows the next slide here, which I've changed to, shows how it also goes forward a little bit. And
right. And you know, the sort of one on the far right is a 3DI one, and the purple is all the extra supporting structure that's put in the sail. And we can do that with paneled sails too. We just put a heavier cloth in the front section of the sail and some strips to reinforce it, and that'll take that load.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of the load on this is a question we got. We're going to go to the next slide after this. Is talking about the pole. So seeing this is the skeleton key. Talk us through a little bit, you know, the Bobstay, what they're needed, and what this batten's for.
Yeah, so you can see the Bobstay that's coming out from the knuckle there and into the pole, and we keep this on all the time. And it's got shock cord inside of it to retract it when the pole's retracted, to, you know, keep the line from dragging in the water. But what the Bobstay does is support the pole from bouncing around, which we find to be critical for one design racing, light air or heavy air, because there's a lot of slop and bend in these poles. But the main point of this Bobstay is that you need it if you're going to carry a code 0. And while the Helix sail will require a lot less load, or put a lot less load on your sprit, it's still an important thing to have in order to carry a code 0, you know, Helix or not. So what we see here is the Bobstay. And then just a side note, we've got a batten on the pole. This is when we were doing outside jibes for heavy air. And this is where we found a good use for the old roll battens.
But the outside jibe too could be something that you might work on if you were sailing double-handed or something like that, because it might be the only way to do it safely or easily on this boat, right? So this may actually, if you're sailing short-handed in a handicap situation, this may actually be a pretty good thing to do, right?
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, outside jibes are a lot easier to jibe the 111. And yeah, if you're short-handed or just a short offshore crew, setting up for outside jibes is definitely a good way to go.
Got it. So, Jeremy, on the next slide here, we have one of the European boats, the Blur here, with their code 0 up. Talk to us a little bit about what we see here, because they're not full pole, what they're doing here, kind of in this photo.
Yeah. I mean, generally, most of the zeros we do are from the end of the pole, but I think in this situation, maybe that's a very sort of tight-winded sail. Maybe that's code 65 or code 55. So they're going, you know, higher angles with it than you would a code 75. So they opted to set the tack point halfway down the pole to reduce the loading on the pole, and got their bobstay going from that point. But it could work. We can design a sail to work from anywhere along that pole. But ideally, the further forward you can get it, the better in terms of reaching performance.
Yeah. So we actually just got a note in the chat that it's a code 50.
Yeah. So that makes sense. It's a code 50, having it from that point, because a code 50 is J0. You're trying to go virtually upwind with that, so that makes good sense having it off that point. But if it's slightly more off the wind sail, then I'd go off the end of the sprit.
Right. So we've talked about, setting the sail up, the luff end, but let's talk about how you actually trim it. That's really critical because you're using the spin sheets is the tweaker. So, the sheet's attached, you have a twing, so Seaton, why do you need the twing? And then, maybe you can explain what it's doing, and then Jeremy, maybe how you set it up or what you guys like to do a little bit.
Yeah. So all these codes, all these code sails we feed off of the Spinnaker sheet, and in order to get the proper lead angle, we use a tweaker or twing, as shown in this photograph. We just have a simple 2-to-1, but it's with a cleat, but it's essentially the exact same thing, and you can really control the leech tension and the foot fullness, flatness, power of the sail. So it's just like having a floating lead for a head sail, and it's something that's very simple to set up, but essential to get the most out of one of your code sails.
Yeah, no, it's an essential bit of kit to have on the boat for any sort of reaching offshore race. We call it a handy billy. I guess you guys do too, do you?
Yeah.
Handy billy.
I'm along or a handy billy.
Handy billy, yeah. Have a handy billy on the boat like that, and a couple of outboard lead snatch blocks is essential for reaching. Because as the wind angle changes, depending on where you're trimming about 0, you're going to need to tweak that up or down to keep the sail working properly.
Yeah, it's just like a regular jib. Like you want to keep the foot and the leech balanced for the particular angle that you're sailing.
Yeah.
Call it a handy billy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just learned something. Never heard of that before.
Yeah, that's what we called it on the snow line too.
There you go.
Another Kiwi term.
And I think it was actually, somebody told me it was a railroad term
Oh, okay.
from the old days of the railroads.
That came from Kiwi.
So, just
How old the people were on my boat. That's why
we're starting to get shorter on time here, but I want to keep kind of trudging along. So let's talk about staysails, right? And what they are, what they're used for. So for downwind, obviously having a Spinnaker staysail, I think on this boat is pretty important. So I want to jump in, A, what it does for performance, and B, what are the rating impacts, all those things. So whichever you guys wants to jump in here. Maybe.
Yeah, I think under most rules, it's basically a free sail because it's small, much smaller than your standard jib in most cases. And, it's really lightweight. It flies, it can fly between the main and the spinnaker. It's a downwind sail. But it's just like adding another, jib size sail to your spinnaker, and if you're sailing at the right angle.
Yeah, I think one of the key points is that in the 111, your head sail will blanket the spinnaker too much until you're sailing angles where you're planing. So having a spinnaker staysail that's smaller in size and tacked further aft provides a nice flow between the spinnaker, the staysail, and the mainsail. And one of a couple of key points about a staysail is, it's mainly to balance the boat, so you're not steering the boat so much as the boat gets kind of rocked up and down the waves. You're not dragging the rudder as much, so your VMG or VMC is going to be better by carrying a staysail versus not carrying a staysail. And sometimes it's just enough of a oomph with the extra sail air to get over a wave, and continually sort of surfing down waves will add up to a lot of distance.
So.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just
I
going
was
to
just going to ask you, how windy does it have to be to use one of these? I mean, what's the wind range we're talking about here?
Generally, so between 10 and 22, 25 knots would be the absolute maximum. So 10 and 20 knots is the ideal for setting this sail. I was just going to say the other thing that it's obviously, like Jack mentioned at the very beginning, it's completely free on most rating rules. You know, there's no penalty carrying it. And it also can double up very nicely as a drifter in real light conditions. If you get completely becalmed, you can put the sail up, and because it's made of such light cloth, it can just be enough to set and get you going. And you can use it as your wind seeker or a drifter, just to help sort of find where the wind's coming from. So yeah, very useful sail to have for any sort of handicap sailing.
I'll go to the next slide because I think we have a photo of it. But talk to me a little bit about, you know, are they furling? What are they made out of? People are kind of curious. I mean, what are we? Some of them are made out of Spinnaker material, right? Some of them are out of really light laminate.
You can make it out of a light nylon or a medium weight nylon, like 1.5 ounce nylon, 3/4 ounce nylon. But we generally will make them out of a code 0 laminate, so real lightweight laminate. They can be on a furler, which is handy, but they're pretty small and easy to put into a small bag, so they don't need to be on a furler. You don't necessarily have to have the expense of a furler, but having the furler allows you to deploy and furl up quite quickly and easily to see if it's working for you or not.
Also in jibes, it's nice to be able to furl it.
Yeah,
that's
a good point. To be able to get rid of it quickly for a jibe. In this slides, and thanks to Peter for allowing us to use these photos of his boat. He and Andreas in North Sweden have done, as I found out, sort of the most development with the Staysails and the positioning. We're building a Staysail for the ORC Worlds, and I've reached out to Andreas to find out a little bit more. And I think the real interesting thing, and this is one of the nice things about North Sails being as large as we are, we have a lot of collective experience and information. But we were really educated by Peter and Andreas on where they have tacked their Spinnaker Staysail. And they originally started where most boats would put their tack position, which is close to the headstay, maybe just aft of the anchor locker in the 111, which I think is in the photo of the left. And then they found that by moving it aft, they actually increased their VMG, most likely just for better flow across the sails. And in the picture on the right, you can see that it's actually not that far. I think it's roughly about a ½ meter in front of the forward hatch. So not the most intuitive spot, but again, they've tried it out and it's worked for them. It's something that we'll do as well. And you know, it can make a big difference in saving time and getting the most out of a sail like this by working with people that have already done it.
So, and just to clarify, I mean, they're hoisting the sail off of the jib halyard or a jib halyard.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So, looking at the last portion of this before we get to a couple of questions is, you know, here's a J121 with 4 sails up here, obviously sailing handicap. But talk us through a little bit about what we have here with this rig on this J121 for a handicap situation.
Yeah, so basically this is a boat called Eagle. It's a Long Island Sound boat. And unfortunately, under almost every rule, he did this because he wanted to try it. But unfortunately, it's not really legal, strictly in our area. But some of the things that came out of it, in this particular case, he added a Genoa staysail. And that jib that's up is the medium heavy jib. And then he has a jib top, which we set up. It could either fly off of the bow or it could fly off of the sprit. And so he can still use the sail and use it with the Genoa staysail legally. But if he was going to race IRC, he could totally race with this configuration. I think the key point here is that with the J111, we sort of talked this at length. And you know, a Genoa staysail is not really a sail that you're going to add to the J111 because you'd have to add a sheave somewhere up by the top spreader, and I'm sure that the mast wouldn't be guaranteed if you did that. And then you know you'd have to add a pad eye probably somewhere near where the Spinnaker staysail was setting in that previous picture, with a lot of reinforcement underneath it because you still need to get that forestay pretty tight that it goes on. But the jib top itself flies really nice. Like in this actual picture, we were sailing around in 7 knots of wind and going 8.5 knots across the water. So all that horsepower made a difference. And the main is, it's setting nicely. It's working just a little bit. It's twisted quite a bit. So the boat's powered right up. And like I say, for the J111, if you're sailing IRC, you might want to think about adding a jib top out on the sprit and then flying it outside of the jib. Then you'd fly the jib, like sort of on the regular lead all the way out with no inhauler, and then you'd set the jib top on the spinnaker sheet with the twinger on it, just like we did with the Code Zero.
Got it. So kind of pulling us all back together now. So I'm gonna throw some notes out here because I learned a lot, and hopefully what I took out of this is correct. So seems like a Spinnaker Staysail, if you're sailing handicap, is a no-brainer, because even if you're doing round the buoys racing, it's generally not a penalty, and you're just going to go faster downwind. So if you're doing any type of handicap, the quick takeaway is Spinnaker Staysails should be priority number 1. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Guys?
Yeah.
And then, the other, I guess, quick takeaway is the class sails, main, your couple jibs, your heavy jib, and your 2 kites will get you through most of the sailing you're going to do. And you're just trying to fill in the gaps then with either a Code Zero of some form, depending upon your rating. And then maybe looking at other downwind spinnakers like A3s and an A4, A5, something like that is filling in your gaps then. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly.
That's, exactly.
Yeah, I think you just look at the inventory, and maybe even, someone's IRC in a boat, they might even add in some extra head sails, J3 head sail as well.
And it seems like one of the things that's worth kind of discussing or people remembering is, and we haven't even talked about it, is, sail class, we generally sail up until it blows, 28 knots, and then we stop sailing, right? But, you're sailing a handicap or a distance race, you could be sailing in a lot more than that. So it's definitely worth talking to whoever your sail expert is on what you need for that situation.
Yeah, or if you're sailing short-handed, like there's lots of
Right.
guys out there that like to sail this boat double-handed.
Yeah.
You're going to want to have your inventory tailored completely differently, because the boat's going to power up so much more quickly.
Yeah.
When you only have 2 guys.
Yeah. And it was interesting, one of the experiences I had doing a distance race on a 111 was how much better it performed, especially on a reaching kind of point of sail with bigger head sails and a reef in than smaller head sail and a full main, how much better the boat went. So there seems to be a lot of different configurations to make this boat go, a lot of experimentation for it. I don't know if that's what you guys have seen, but.
Yeah, no, that's a real good point, Alan, is that, don't be afraid to reef. The boat, as I said earlier, the boat does not reach all that well versus other types of boats, and reefing the main and trying some different, code sails or spinnakers, you can probably really increase the performance of the boat, but just the boat will become a lot more forgiving to steer. It's already a little tricky when you're on the edge to steer this boat. It doesn't give you much warning when it wants to spin out, and by reefing the main, you probably reduce the amount of you're dragging the rudder through the water. Yeah,
like if you're fetching and, it's getting windy at the top, sort of 15 knots and above, you might want to reef fairly quickly, because you want the big sail out there to get over the swells. You don't want to go to a tiny jib, and having to, being able to carry that medium heavy, and then reduce a little bit of the heeling with the, by making the main smaller, you're going to go faster for sure.
Right. Yeah. Well, Peter actually just chimed in and said one of the things is, a Code Zero and a reef when it's windy actually goes pretty well in his experience. So
yeah, I've sailed on lots of boats with the main reefed and the Code Zero wicked in tight, and the boat goes.
So we do have a couple questions. So for PHRF, what is the one design classification of sails, and what limits does that put on the inventory in PHRF?
That's a good question. And every region is a little bit different. Some regions rate the 111 specifically on the class rules and the class sails. class crew weight, etc. And some regions just rate the boat to, you know, the biggest spinnaker, the biggest, you know, mainsail and headsail. And so you kind of have to know what your region has to say about that.
Yeah, because like you say, in Southern California, you can have a 155 or something square meter kite, and you don't really get any credit for having a class size smaller kite.
That's correct. That's what we found. So yeah, so some PHRF regions will just go to a formula based on what the ISP and SBL are. And, you know, some regions will rate the boat based on what the class size sails are. Code zeros with the 75% mid-girth qualify as a spinnaker, so they generally are not penalized in PHRF. Code sails with a smaller mid-girth will possibly be penalized. I know in San Francisco, we're looking at sails under 75% mid-girth on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not sure what other PHRF regions are doing.
In Long Island Sound, they're going to allow them, but a -6.
Okay.
And then they're just illegal in most other ones.
Yeah.
So a couple other questions we've got. And Jeremy, this goes to your windy sailing video. What wind speed do you think that you should be planing in, and what spinnaker would you be using in that condition?
Planing, I think you can probably plane in anything over, definitely anything over 18 knots. You can get into planing mode. And yeah, you start off with the A2, take that probably up to 25 knots. And then anything over that, you'd be on the A4. But the A4 would be full size.
Okay.
Just be a heavier cloth. Because if you drop the area of the A4 down, then generally you find that is nowhere near as competitive. You lose your performance quite quickly when you make a smaller A4. You want the A4 to be full size to keep all that power in the rig and keep the boat really going.
Got it. One of the other questions is, so they predominantly sail in light air. This person asked, what would you do to optimize the boat for light air?
Get everything out of the boat that you can. And get it as light as possible.
Yeah, I think Peter had tried a bigger kite as well, hadn't he? On Blur, like a bigger 155 square meter kite for the real light air. I think that, I think if you're in a real light air venue, you could look into that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're sailing predominantly light air location, you may look at the jib size. Obviously, the class jibs are a little bit undersized because they were meant to be on the furler. And if you were sailing with a regular foil, eliminated the furler, you could probably go a little bit bigger on the jib. The whole point of this is showing that the boat can be competitive with class sails. But if you're never going to sail class, then you may look at a jib that's slightly larger.
Right.
Yeah.
And for sure, make sure your bottom is as smooth as it can be. And like I say, get all of the weight out of the ends. Anything that you can out of the bow, out of the stern. Get the boat to sail flat, light as possible. That's your best option.
Our last question here is on inhauling. So does wave state affect your use of inhaulers? Which I would say it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You want to get that, get that jib twisted using the inhaulers to sort of match what you're doing with the mainsail, really. So if you've got lots of waves, stopping the boat all the time, you want to have plenty of twist in that jib, which you can get. Inhaulers can help you get.
Right. Okay. There we go. Well, thank the three of you. Let me get to the next. Wrapping this up here. If you guys have any questions out there, feel free to email any one of the four of us here on this talk. Any questions you have about one design, handicap, you name it, we can at least try and point you in the right direction if we don't have the answer. But I know all of us were glad to be here with you guys today. We hope to be sailing soon and seeing you guys out there. So don't be afraid to reach out. And again, thank you to Steve and Jack and Jeremy for all their knowledge and the time that they put into this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
Thanks,
No
Alan.
problem. Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Chat with you soon.
Bye.